The words hung in the air like incense before a storm. "Maybe you should stop hiding behind your Bible and face the real world," Samantha Bee said, her voice slicing through the packed congressional hearing room. Every camera turned, every breath held. Jonathan Roumie, seated quietly among a panel of witnesses, slowly raised his head. What happened in the next 30 seconds would echo through the Capitol, through social media, and through a nation grappling with the tension between faith and cynicism. This wasn't just another disagreement over religious liberty. This was the moment a media-savvy skeptic thought she could mock faith itself and silence one of its most unexpected defenders. But Jonathan Roumie hadn't come here to argue. He had come prepared to witness, and his response, calm, centered, impossible to ignore, didn't just stun the room, it shifted the entire conversation. Before we break down what may be the most profound and unexpected congressional moment of the year, hit that like button if you're ready for faith meeting fire in the heart of Washington. And subscribe, because what's about to unfold is political drama with a soul. The hearing room was packed. C-SPAN was live. Twitter was poised for impact. No one in that chamber realized they were moments away from a confrontation that would be studied, shared, and remembered. But to understand what really happened, we need to set the stage. Samantha Bee walked into that hearing room with the swagger of someone who'd made a career out of ridiculing institutions, especially your religious ones. At 54, she was still riding the remnants of her late-night fame, known for barbed monologues and unapologetic secularism. A former host, a media figure, a provocateur, she had been invited to testify at a House subcommittee hearing titled "Faith in the Public Square, Constitutional Right or Cultural Threat." And Samantha was ready to make a scene. She wore defiance-like armor, crimson blazer, bold earrings, and that signature smirk. Her prepared remarks had already made the rounds on social media, a warning against what she called the creeping theocracy disguised as religious freedom. This was her turf, her audience, her brand. But sitting a few chairs down was someone she didn't expect, Jonathan Roumie. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a theologian. He was an actor. And yet, for millions of Americans, he had become the face of something sacred. Known for portraying Jesus in The Chosen, Roumie had become a soft-spoken ambassador for faith in mainstream culture. Someone who didn't preach, but who lived what he believed. He wasn't there to campaign. He had been invited to speak about the role of faith in civic life, especially among younger generations feeling alienated by both politics and religion. He came prepared, but he hadn't come to perform. And most people in that room underestimated him. But that was about to change. You see, this hearing wasn't just about prayer in schools or nativity scenes in public parks. It was about something far deeper. Can a person of faith still speak openly in modern America without being mocked, dismissed, or told to keep their beliefs private? The committee had been arguing for nearly 2 hours. Republicans defending religious liberty, Democrats warning about its misuse. Roumie had quietly listened, but then it was his turn to speak. And just as he reached for his notes, Samantha Bee, unprompted, cut him off with the line that would be replayed 1,000,000 times by nightfall. "You're an actor, not a prophet, Jonathan. Maybe it's time to stop hiding behind parables and join the rest of us in reality." Gasps, murmurs. Even the court reporter paused. It wasn't just dismissive, it was personal. It was spiritual condescension wrapped in sarcasm, and it lit a fuse that would burn far beyond that hearing room. Jonathan Roumie looked up, calm, still, but his eyes carried the weight of generations. Artists, prophets, and ordinary believers who had long been told to be silent. And now, finally, he would speak. "We need to ensure that every citizen has the freedom to believe or not believe, and that no belief system dominates the public square," Samantha Bee said, her voice cool and calculated. "That's just common sense." "That's not what I asked," Jonathan Roumie replied, his voice steady as a cathedral bell. "I asked for evidence. You've repeatedly claimed in your media appearances that religious Americans, particularly Christians, are trying to impose their beliefs through legislation. You've called them dangerous, theocrats in robes. Do you have specific evidence that their presence in public life is a threat to democracy?" The room got noticeably quieter. Staffers sat up straighter, cameras panned. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be the kind of exchange you see in polite hearings. But Jonathan didn't flinch. Samantha's media reflexes kicked in. "Mr. Isan Roumie," she said, crossing her arms, "I think you're trying to turn this into a sermon about faith when it's really about the Constitution. Every American, regardless of what they believe, deserves to be free from religion dominating their lives. With respect, Jonathan said quietly but firmly. You don't get to decide what this is about for me. I didn't come here to preach. I came here to address the repeated, sweeping claims you have made against people of faith. I've spent years listening to how religious Americans are portrayed in your segments. Mocked, dismissed, told to sit down and be quiet if they want to be taken seriously in public life. That has a very specific history in this country. Republican members of the committee shifted uneasily. This wasn't the narrative they had expected. The hearing had been supposed to showcase cultural consensus, not spiritual confrontation. The ranking Democrat tried to intervene. Perhaps we should move on to more relevant legal questions. This is relevant, Jonathan interrupted, eyes still on Samantha. Ms. B, yes or no? Do you have concrete evidence that people of faith, pastors, teachers, actors like myself, are actively undermining democracy? Samantha's tone tightened. This isn't how these hearings are supposed to work. Witnesses aren't put on trial. Roumie's posture didn't change. No one's putting you on trial. I'm simply asking for proof. I think your question is loaded and unfair, Samantha replied, her voice rising. I've never said religion is the enemy, but when people use it as a shield to avoid accountability, that's a problem. Jonathan tilted his head slightly. Use it as a shield? He reached into his notes. You tweeted just last week that faith-based arguments are a smokescreen for authoritarian policy. What exactly did you mean by that? Samantha shifted in her seat. Faith groups don't all agree, she snapped. Some religious leaders support LGBTQ+ rights, abortion access, and science. I'm talking about people who weaponize belief to gain power. Jonathan leaned forward now, calm but resolute. What exactly am I doing here today that threatens democracy, Ms. B? Speaking with conviction, quoting scripture, praying before testimony? What part of my presence makes you uncomfortable? A murmur rippled through the room. This was no longer about faith in politics. This had become a referendum on whether people of faith still had a place in America's public life. The chairman tried to jump in. Let's give the witness time to respond. She's not responding, Jonathan said softly. She's deflecting. He exhaled slowly. Let me try again. Do you have any evidence that Americans who openly live their faith, especially in entertainment or public service, are a systemic danger to democracy? Or are you simply uncomfortable with how visible we've become? Samantha Bee's face was beginning to flush. Her practiced smile had faded. Her composure was slipping. The script she came in with? Useless now. Mr. Roumie, she said sharply, I don't think you understand what it means to live in a secular democracy. Maybe instead of playing the martyr, you should spend more time acting and less time preaching. The hearing room froze. Even the court reporter looked up. What had just happened was more than just a jab. It was a direct mockery of Roumie's calling, his faith, and his right to speak. Jonathan blinked slowly. Then he leaned into his microphone. Excuse me, did you just tell me, in front of this committee and the American people, that because I believe in something greater than myself, I don't belong in public life? B doubled down. I'm saying maybe your place is on a stage, not in a hearing room deciding public policy. The fuse had officially been lit. Roumie sat back for a moment, quiet. Then that familiar expression, the one audiences had come to know, settled on his face. That subtle look of steady fire behind calm eyes. Ms. B, he said gently, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you suggesting that people of faith should remain silent in civic spaces unless they conform to your definition of acceptable belief? The silence in the chamber was deafening. Samantha Bee had no idea that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her public career. And Jonathan Roumie, he was only just beginning. Maybe you should go back to your Bible study group and leave the rest of us to govern in the real world. Samantha Bee's voice sliced through the hearing room like a blade. The air vanished. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Congressional staff froze. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Even the court reporter looked up in disbelief. For 3 seconds, silence. 3 eternal seconds as the gravity of what had just been said settled in. Samantha Bee had just told Jonathan Roumie, a guest witness, a citizen, a person of faith, to go back to where he came from, not geographically, but spiritually. Back to quiet religion, private prayer, off-camera faith, away from public discourse. Roumie took a breath. When he looked up, his eyes burned, not with anger but with holy conviction. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but every syllable rang like a cathedral bell. Excuse me, he said, so softly the entire room leaned in. Did you just tell me that because I'm a man of faith, I don't belong here? Samantha shifted, but didn't apologize. I said you should focus on your spiritual community instead of using faith to lecture the rest of us about democracy, she replied. Jonathan sat up straight, bitter. His tone never rose, but his words carried a force that made every person in the room feel the weight of history pressing down. No, what you said was that I should go back. And let me be very clear about something, Ms. B. I am where I came from. He stood. The room went still. The cameras zoomed in. Screens across the country lit up. But he didn't speak like a performer. He spoke like someone on holy ground. I was raised in New York City. I was educated in the arts. I've played saints and sinners. I've walked both the darkest roads and the narrowest paths. And I stand here not as a celebrity, but as a citizen, a believer, an American. This room, this chamber, this moment is my country. These are my people. And this is my house too. The gallery began to stir. Phones clicked. Whispers spread. Social media began to ignite. But Roumie wasn't done. He stepped forward, his voice growing in depth and resonance. But let me tell you where else I come from. I come from generations of believers who were mocked, silenced, told that their convictions didn't belong in the public square. I come from pilgrims who crossed oceans with scripture in hand, from abolitionists who preached freedom from pulpits, from civil rights leaders who carried Bibles into battle, from priests and nuns who served in war zones, from mothers who prayed when the laws failed them. I come from a church that was burned, a faith that was tested, and a people who never stopped believing that morality and justice could walk hand in hand. Several members of Congress lowered their gaze. Some nodded quietly. I come from the men and women who were told to stop talking about God at work, to keep their convictions quiet, to leave them at home. And you know what they said, Ms. B? We're not going anywhere. We stayed, we voted, we prayed, we spoke, and yes, we showed up in hearing rooms like this one. He turned toward her fully now. You don't get to tell me to leave because you're uncomfortable with what I believe. You don't get to dismiss my presence here as a distraction or a threat. I was invited, I was appointed, and I was called. The silence was thunderous. Since you seem unclear on how this republic works, let me offer a quick civics reminder. In America, faith isn't a disqualification. It's a guarantee. Our Constitution enshrines the right to speak and to believe, to challenge. I don't need your permission to testify. I don't need your comfort to ask hard questions. And I certainly don't need advice from someone who mocks people like me for simply existing. The Republican chairman tried to speak. Perhaps we should... No, Roumie said firmly. I'm not finished. Ms. B came here to talk about democracy. Let's do that. Let's talk about how you've spent years using your platform to mock believers. Let's talk about how you've painted people of faith as backward, dangerous, outdated. Let's talk about how, when pressed for proof, you resort to insults like, go back to Bible study. He opened a thick folder from his prepared materials. Because unlike you, Ms. B, I came with actual facts. Studies from Pew, Barna, Gallup, all showing that people of faith contribute more in charity, civic engagement, and local leadership than any other group. I have evidence. What do you have besides applause lines and punchlines? He looked up, calm but cutting. You could be using your influence to bridge divides, to listen, to build. Instead, you're here to tear down. Not just me, but the millions I quietly represent. He shook his head. My neighbors didn't send me here to be agreeable to those who sneer at them. They sent me to speak truthfully, with humility and clarity. And that's what I'll do. He closed his folder. Maybe you should go back. Back to whatever media school taught you it was okay to mock people's faith. Because clearly they didn't teach you the First Amendment, or history, or basic human decency. The room erupted. Democratic members clapped. Some Republicans blinked in disbelief. Reporters couldn't type fast enough. C-SPAN lit up. Samantha Bee sat there, stunned, and Jonathan Roumie, unshaken, undiminished, turned to the chairman and said calmly, "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." I yield back. The gallery buzzed with energy. Republican members looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. And Samantha Bee, arms crossed, face flushed, sat there realizing in real time that she had just made a career-ending mistake on live television. The committee chairman frantically banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but it was too late. The moment had already broken free. Phones buzzed. Alerts lit up every hour on the screen. Congressional staff ran in and out, coordinating press statements, scrambling for damage control. A wave was building, and there was no stopping it. Samantha tried one last time to salvage the situation. "Mr. Roumie, I think you're mischaracterizing what I said." Jonathan didn't blink. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "I think America heard exactly what you said, and I think they heard exactly what I said in response." He gathered his notes, looked directly into the C-SPAN camera, the very lens that had recorded everything. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." I yield back. The room was in chaos, but Jonathan Roumie, his work was done. He had just delivered one of the most powerful responses to spiritual marginalization ever captured on congressional video, and the entire country was about to see it. Before the hearing had even ended, social media was on fire. The clip of Samantha Bee telling Roumie to go back to Bible study was already being shared thousands of times per minute, but it wasn't her words that made the internet erupt. It was Roumie's reply, calm, firm, rooted in history, faith, and the Constitution, that set the digital world ablaze. Jonathan Roumie trended within 10 minutes. "This is my house too," followed seconds later. TikTok users created montage reactions. Instagram reels were filled with screenshots of his speech. Threads and X, formerly Twitter, flooded with quotes like, "We didn't leave, we stayed, we spoke." Public reaction was instant and thunderous. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "You just watched a masterclass in conviction. Jonathan Roumie showed us what grace under fire really looks like." Senator Tim Scott added, "Faith is not weakness, it is strength." And Mr. Roumie showed us all how to wield it with dignity. Even some Republicans distanced themselves from Bee's remark. Senator Susan Collins released a statement. "There is no place in Congress for disdain toward any American based on their faith." Fox News struggled to find a consistent angle. Some hosts defended Samantha, claiming her words were taken out of context, but even they looked uncomfortable. Tucker Carlson's show that night barely mentioned it, and when he did, it was a passing comment before pivoting to Democratic theater. His usual fire was gone. Other conservative outlets were more direct. National Review published, "When Mockery of Faith Backfires, How Bee Handed Democrats a Cultural Win." The Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote, "What Ms. Bee demonstrated was not secular courage, but moral contempt. This is how you lose the cultural center." Within hours, Bee's team was in full retreat. Her PR statement read, "Ms. Bee's remarks were meant to challenge ideas, not individuals. She respects Mr. Roumie and all people of faith." But it was too late. The video had gone viral, and her words were crystal clear. She went on Newsmax and later on her own podcast to spin the moment. "I was talking about religious overreach, not about faith itself." But each appearance only made it worse. Clips of her awkward clarifications were now side by side with Roumie's poised rebuttal, and she looked even more flustered by comparison. Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for a formal censure, stating, "There is no room in American politics for hostility toward religion or people of faith." Faith-based coalitions released statements of support. Evangelical, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, and even secular leaders joined in solidarity, saying, "This isn't about politics. This is about the right to believe and be heard." The Democratic National Committee immediately turned Roumie's moment into a rallying cry. Emails went out titled, "He stood for all of us. Faith belongs." This is what conviction looks like. Donations surged. Faith-driven civic groups reported a 300% increase in new signups. CNN's Anderson Cooper called it one of the most profound cultural moments Congress has seen in years. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow dedicated an entire segment. "What you saw today wasn't a performance. It was testimony about belonging, faith, and the meaning of the First Amendment." Even BBC and The Guardian picked up the story, calling it a defining moment in America's spiritual political divide. Universities reacted swiftly. Harvard Kennedy School invited Roumie to speak at their symposium on civic identity. Georgetown University declared it would use his testimony and coursework on faith in public life. Constitutional law professors wrote op-eds praising Roumie's restraint, clarity, and use of legal precedent. "He didn't just defend himself," wrote Prof. Lawrence Tribe, "he defended the entire idea of why we protect conscience in the first place." Political analysts agreed the moment would have long-term consequences. James Carville said, "He didn't argue, he stood. That's power." Mike Murphy, GOP strategist, warned, "This is how you lose voters of faith." Bee's comment was elitist, arrogant, and Roumie flipped it into a sermon for the ages. The moment was studied, quoted, preached, replayed. Not just because it was viral, but because it reminded people, right or left, that conviction doesn't need volume. It just needs truth. And Jonathan Roumie, he became more than a man who portrayed Jesus on screen. He became a voice that carried faith into the halls of power and didn't flinch when mocked. Political strategists on both sides immediately recognized this moment would echo far beyond the hearing room. Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher noted, "This is the kind of moment that galvanizes faith-based voters who feel ignored, and it resonates with independents who crave moral clarity." Republican strategist Mike Murphy was more blunt. "This is a disaster. We've been trying to win back suburban moderates and spiritually minded independents. Then someone says the one thing you never say, go back to Bible study." The moment became a rallying cry across faith communities and civic circles alike. At churches, synagogues, and town halls, a new phrase emerged. We need more leaders like Jonathan Roumie. Roumie was suddenly everywhere. He was invited onto every major news show, from Anderson Cooper 360 to CBS Sunday Morning to Fox News Sunday, where even the anchors had to admit he showed what calm, principled testimony looks like under attack. His X, formerly Twitter, following exploded. Hundreds of thousands joined overnight. But Roumie didn't use the moment for self-promotion. In every interview, he redirected attention to the true themes: freedom of conscience, respect in public life, and the constitutional promise that faith is not a disqualifier. "I didn't come to testify to go viral," he told the Washington Post. "But if what happened helps people realize that belief has a place in public service, then I thank God for the moment." Op-eds, cable panels, and classrooms erupted with analysis. Some commentators focused on the hostility toward religion in elite circles. Others praised the strength of Roumie's response as a roadmap for civil discourse. But all agreed this moment changed things. It also marked a generational shift in the faith and politics debate. Roumie, at 50, represented a new kind of public believer. Not bombastic, not partisan, but anchored, humble, and unflinching. His answer wasn't angry. It was prepared. It was principled. It was unforgettable. Legal and professional organizations weighed in. The California Bar Association, where Roumie is not a member but has many advocates, issued a statement praising his tone. Mr. Roumie demonstrated the highest ideals of public testimony: composure under fire, factual integrity, and a commitment to civil liberties. Meanwhile, calls for Samantha Bee's censure mounted. Critics argued that her words may not have been illegal, but they violated the spirit of inclusive, pluralistic democracy. "You don't have to share someone's beliefs," one editorial read, "but you cannot demand they abandon them to be heard." International media reacted strongly. The BBC ran the headline, "Faith on Trial," and "One man's calm voice shakes U.S. Congress." The Guardian wrote, "When the gospel met contempt, a cultural clash watched around the world." A European Union official, speaking anonymously, told reporters, "We admire America's constitutional protections, but moments like this reveal just how fragile public respect for them has become." In schools and seminaries, the moment became required viewing. Debate teams studied Roumie's body language. Public speaking professors broke down his pacing and tone. Theology professors pointed out the biblical echoes in his language, his grace under pressure, his refusal to retaliate. "He didn't just win the argument," one professor said. "He embodied the witness." Crisis communication programs began teaching his response as a case study in dignity over deflection. For Jonathan Roumie, it wasn't about fame, it was about mission. He used his new platform to advocate, not for himself, but for those who feel silenced in modern discourse. People of faith, people of conscience, people tired of being told to stay in their lane. "That moment wasn't about me," Roumie said later. "It was about the idea that no American should be told they don't belong in their own democracy because they pray before they speak." Political historian Douglas Brinkley wrote, "Jonathan Roumie didn't just defend faith, he showed how it can coexist with reason, law, and humility. He proved that reverence still has a place in the Republic." Meanwhile, Samantha Bee's career was in question. Her shows lost sponsors. Her PR team struggled to reframe the narrative. Faith groups organized boycotts, not out of vengeance, but to send a message. "Mock us if you must, but don't be surprised when we answer." As media analyst Jeff Jarvis warned, and in the age of viral moments, every microphone is a megaphone, every insult an archive, and every act of grace eternal. Months later, the phrase "that's my house too" remained a hashtag, a sermon title, a campaign slogan, and a quiet affirmation spoken in churches, community centers, and classrooms. Jonathan Roumie hadn't just responded to a smear, he had defined a movement. If this moment moved you, if you believe that calm conviction still has a place in our public life, then help us keep sharing stories that matter. What did you think of Jonathan Roumie's response? Do voices of faith still belong in our democracy? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more powerful moments like this, real courage, real confrontation, real conviction, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. Thanks for watching.